He remembered everyone's birthday. He brought coffee without being asked. He was the first to offer help and the last to take credit. Everyone loved him. He was also systematically destroying 3 people's careers, simultaneously, with zero guilt. Not because he was evil, because he was wired differently. Psychopathy is the most misunderstood psychological condition in existence. Hollywood gave you the serial killer, the cold stare, the knife, the monster you can see coming. The science tells a completely different story, and once you understand it, you will never look at the people around you the same way again. Stay with me, because what I am about to show you is not what you think psychopathy is. And that gap between what you think and what it actually is, that gap is exactly where they operate. Let us start with what psychopathy is not. It is not the man in the hockey mask. It is not the genius cannibal. It is not the cold, dead eyes in a mugshot. Robert Hare, the psychologist who spent 35 years studying psychopathy and created the gold standard assessment tool still used in prisons worldwide, estimated that approximately 1% of the general population meets the clinical criteria for psychopathy. That is roughly 80 million people on this planet. Most of them have never committed a violent crime. Most of them are employed. Some are extraordinarily successful. Many are in relationships. They go to the gym. They have opinions about coffee. They remember your name and use it deliberately because they learned it makes people feel valued. The monster image does not just misrepresent psychopathy, it protects it. Because when we are looking for the monster we cannot see, we miss the person sitting across from us at the dinner table. So, what is psychopathy actually? And how does it work inside the brain? Here is where it gets fascinating. A landmark 2025 study scanned the brains of 108 adults and measured psychopathic traits across multiple dimensions simultaneously. What they found shattered the single-category model completely. Psychopathy is not one thing. It never was. The researchers identified distinct neural disruptions that do not all occur together or in the same way. People who score high on the charm and deception dimension show reduced sensitivity in their reward processing circuits. The things that make normal people feel good, connection, praise, achievement, register differently. Not absent, different. People who score high on the impulsive and antisocial dimension show disrupted responses to punishment. They do not learn from consequences the way other brains do. The signal that tells most people, "That hurt someone, do not do that again," arrives late, quietly, or not at all. These are 2 completely different neurological failures, producing what looks like the same surface behavior. And then there is the amygdala, the brain's emotional alarm system. In most psychopathic brains, functional MRI shows reduced activation in the amygdala during emotional stimuli. When you see someone crying, your amygdala fires. Theirs fires less. Not zero in most cases, less. This is not a choice. This is hardware. This brings us to the part that changes everything. Psychopathy is not a light switch. It is a dimmer. The Hare Psychopathy Checklist, the tool used in forensic psychology worldwide, measures 20 distinct traits across 2 broad factors. Factor 1 covers the interpersonal and emotional profile: charm, grandiosity, pathological lying, shallow affect, lack of remorse. Factor 2 covers the lifestyle and antisocial behavior: impulsivity, irresponsibility, criminal versatility. Here is what most people do not know. You can score extremely high on factor 1 and low on factor 2, meaning you can have the full emotional and interpersonal profile of a psychopath, the charm, the manipulation, the absence of genuine empathy, the calculated lying, without the impulsive antisocial behavior. Researchers call this successful psychopathy. These individuals do not end up in prison. They end up in boardrooms, in operating theaters, in political offices, in relationships where their partner spends years slowly losing their grip on reality without understanding why. Kent Keel, a neuroscientist who has scanned more psychopathic brains than anyone alive, estimates that the economic cost of psychopathy in the United States alone exceeds the combined cost of all other mental health conditions. Not because of violence, because of fraud, manipulation, exploitation, and the systematic destruction of organizations and individuals from the inside. The serial killer costs one community. The successful psychopath costs thousands of people across decades. So how do they do it? How does someone without genuine empathy simulate it so convincingly that people describe them as the most charming person they have ever met? The answer is cognitive empathy. There are two types of empathy. Affective empathy is feeling what someone else feels. It is involuntary. It is the wince when you watch someone stub their toe. Most psychopaths have reduced affective empathy. Cognitive empathy is understanding what someone else feels without necessarily feeling it yourself. It is the ability to accurately model another person's emotional state and predict how they will respond. Psychopaths, particularly those in the successful category, often have exceptional cognitive empathy. They cannot feel what you feel, but they can read you with extraordinary precision. They know exactly which words will make you trust them, which vulnerability to mirror back to you, which moment of warmth will disarm the exact defense you just raised. They learned empathy the way most people learn a foreign language, intellectually, deliberately, with attention to vocabulary and grammar and accent, and some of them became completely fluent. This is why survivors of relationships with psychopathic partners so often describe a specific moment, sometimes years in, when they caught a glimpse of something behind the performance and could not explain what they saw. The mask slipped for a fraction of a second, and then it was back. Perfect, warm, completely convincing. What they saw was the absence of the thing that was supposed to be there. Now here is the question you have been sitting with since the first minute of this video. Do you know one? The research says, statistically, yes. At 1% of the population, if you have had 100 meaningful relationships in your life, friendships, colleagues, romantic partners, family members, one of them statistically meets the clinical criteria. But here is what makes identification almost impossible. The traits that define psychopathy in clinical settings are also traits that exist in non-psychopathic people in smaller degrees. Charm, confidence, decisiveness, low anxiety in high-pressure situations, the capacity to make hard decisions without being paralyzed by emotion. In the right context, these traits are valued, sought after, promoted. So how do you know? What is the difference between a genuinely confident person and someone performing confidence because they calculated it would work? Researchers point to one consistent tell across decades of study: consistency between contexts. Most people behave slightly differently depending on who they are with. Slightly more formal at work, slightly more relaxed with close friends, slightly more careful around strangers. Psychopaths show unusual consistency. Because the performance is always deliberate, it tends to be more uniform. The mask does not adjust naturally because natural adjustment requires genuine feeling driving it. The other tell is reactions to genuine suffering. Not surface reactions, those can be performed. The microsecond before the performance kicks in. What does their face do in the millisecond before they have decided what expression is appropriate? Most people do not have to decide. Here is the part nobody talks about. Psychopathy exists on a continuum that includes all of us. The same traits that in their extreme form define psychopathy exist in milder forms in the general population. The ability to stay calm in crisis, to make decisions that hurt someone for a larger benefit, to not be overwhelmed by other people's emotions, to charm a room, to recognize what someone wants and give it to them. We do not call these things psychopathic when they are mild and directed toward pro-social ends. We call them leadership. We call them resilience. We call them social intelligence. The brain that produces clinical psychopathy and the brain that produces a brilliant surgeon or a successful negotiator or a steady-handed crisis responder may be operating on the same underlying neural architecture, just at different points on the spectrum. This does not excuse harm. It does not romanticize a condition that causes genuine devastation to real people. But it forces a more uncomfortable question than simply, are they a monster? The question is, where is the line? Who draws it? And what happens to a society that keeps promoting the traits it refuses to name? Robert Hare spent 35 years studying the psychopathic mind and said in his final years that the thing that disturbed him most was not what he found in prisons, it was what he found outside them. Psychopathy at its core is not about violence. It is about the absence of the internal experience that makes most people stop. The moment of hesitation before you do something that will hurt someone. The weight that arrives afterward. The thing that cost you something. For most people, that cost is automatic, biological, inescapable. For a small percentage of the population, it simply does not arrive. And in a world that mistakes the absence of hesitation for strength, that absence can look, for a very long time, like everything we admire. The most dangerous psychopath you will ever encounter will not frighten you. They will make you feel understood, seen, chosen, special. And that is the last thing I want to leave you with. Not fear, understanding. Because understanding is the only protection that actually works. If this changed how you see something, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And follow The Dark Psyche, because we are just getting started.